This is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. This is part 2 of our conversation with the founder of Intelligentsia and the Meteor, Doug Zell. Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to this Founder Friday episode. It's a two-parter called Switching Gears with the founder of Intelligentsia Coffee and the Meteor, Doug Zell. I'm super grateful and honored to have Doug on the show, and hopefully you have listened to part 1, where we tell the story of how Intelligentsia was founded, the values and the operational frameworks and goals of that, and how it scaled, and how that chapter of Doug Zell's life as a founder and eventual board member came to a close to open up to something new, to switch gears, if you will, to co-found with friend Chris St. Peter, the Meteor. And the founding of the Meteor was based on the idea that Doug and Chris wanted to create a beautiful environment that combines all the things that they love under one roof. Of course, again, that's great food and thoughtfully chosen wine, carefully prepared coffee, and bicycles. And the whole motto for this is Espresso, champagne, and chain lube. I've been to their shop in Bentonville. It was an awesome culture, and I love what they created. And you know, there's so much that Doug has brought to the table here that speaks to everything that he's learned as a leader and creative force at Intelligentsia. And with this fresh concept, they're seeing a lot of success, and the community is being engaged, drawing people together who love all of these things, if not just discovering a new level of enjoying their community through the Meteor. And so today we're going to be talking with Doug about how this came about and what it's like to kind of leave something like Intelligentsia and start something new. You know, this is a concept that has lots of different departments, of course. You've got many different areas of expertise needed under one roof of food and wine and bicycles and coffee. And how do you make this all work? I mean, it requires a lot of intangibles that you develop over a long career, and it requires an amazing team. And that is really the theme that we are focusing on as we continue this conversation with Doug Zell, now into part 2, talking about the Meteor. And so, again, I'm honored to have Doug on the show. Hope you enjoy the second part of our Founder Friday series. Without anything else, let's get right to it. Here now is Doug Zell, co-founder of the Meteor. You started the Meteor because we've been talking about what you had been doing for 20 years, building a company, but it sounds like cycling has long been part of your life, and now you get to bring these two things together. So did you really conceive in 2015 to do this as a combination kind of shop? What from all of your history inspired this concept in that moment?
Well, I raced bicycles as a kid, so, and then I think I got back into it in 2013.
Oh, wow.
As an older racer.
That's great.
Through a series of sponsoring a collegiate team, a kid that was from Chicago. Anyway, I guess it's a long story, which we can go into. But I got back into riding, and then in the course of Intelligentsia becoming successful, enjoyed wine.
Sure.
Of course, food.
Love it.
Food and wine are not, that distant of a relative to coffee, right? It's in the culinary realm. So my operating partner of the Meteor, somebody that, raced with, I like to say, a recovering Chicago attorney. We were out on some rides, and it was like, hey, let's see if we can put all these things in one place. I think we perhaps perceived it more of being more of a coffee bar and, bike shop together. Even in its 4 years of existence now, it's really evolved into being an all-day cafe. We like to say an unexpected mashup of, an ingredient-driven cafe, all-day cafe, and organic biodynamic bottle shop and boutique bike shop all under one roof. So that's what it evolved to. And that's what we believe to be the right format. So I think that it takes a lot of the elements of what is great about a coffee bar, if you will, and then adds other pieces that, to me, give it a more completeness, give it greater completeness. Because, there's a whole cycling and active lifestyle community that would love to be able to get a coffee or a glass of wine after their run or their ride. And then there's the people that don't care anything about that, but would still like to get a great coffee or some nice food and have it be unfussy and approachable. And I think that's what the Meteor is. And then there's this love of cycling and trying to encourage more people to do that as well. there was a point where it was an idea worth trying. And I'm one of those people that believes that like once the idea is born, sometimes you're like, man, I shouldn't do that. Shouldn't do that. And then you're like, all right, I think we should see if we can make this work. So the pieces came together after kind of a number of conversations and, 3-day rides from wherever to wherever. I think we did a 3-day ride from like Boston to Brooklyn. And just that, each of those rides would end up with you would have a glass of wine at the end of it, or even some like sparkling wine. So hence the Espresso Champagne Chain Lube moniker.
Yeah.
So it just made sense to have this mashup of things that we loved in one place. I think if you think about the current coffee bar environment, one realizes that it has to be so busy all the time for it to be economically viable. In most major cities, given the cost of the folks working there, given the rent, given all of those things, with the Meteor concept, you've got more things if you want to say more things to buy, but there's real food to eat, there's coffee, there's wine, there's bikes, and it's now housed in the same place. So there's a number of, if you want to say thoughtful economic reasons that it can work in terms of what revenue can be versus just a coffee bar or just a little bike shop or a little wine shop.
That's interesting because you have this history of making these moves that are pushing the envelope in an area that maybe gives you muscle memory. It seems like it played into how you decided that this was a good idea. We're going to do this. Maybe subconsciously, the history of what was done for 20 years with Intelligentsia is playing into some of the ease with which I say ease, but I don't know, but seemingly the ease with which this mashup sounded like a pretty great idea. So do you find that to be true? Like it was just a little bit more naturally who you are and who you became as a result of your history?
I would say yes. I think that what entrepreneurs will tell, I don't say you, anyone, is that their idea makes sense to them. And then I think the other piece that you begin to have confidence in is that your idea can actually work. Well, there's kooky ideas and there's good ideas. And sometimes we won't know which one it was for for a while. But I think that, do I have confidence that, I don't want to jinx anything, but you certainly don't enter into these things lacking confidence that they will work. I think that the ability to endure the hard parts during startup, which to me, the word startup is a much longer period than like a year. It's like 5 years, right? That's when you're like figuring this stuff out.
Yeah.
There's things that you learn in the process that, are incredibly revealing, and they may be incredibly simple, right? But you didn't know that. Again, it's something like you didn't know that you didn't know. And then you discover this thing, you're like, oh, right. And I feel like that process takes about 5 years, and like regardless of the industry. And even if you have experience in the industry working for someone else, it still takes you 5 years to kind of vet all of those things that you didn't know. So startup is actually a long time.
Well said.
But I think what you do believe as a successful entrepreneur is that you will figure out most all of those things at some point, hopefully in time for the business to be viable.
So, as a connoisseur of food and wine, but a business background in coffee, that leads me to ask the question about, the wisdom of, or maybe the crossover of wisdom that is in the coffee category. How easily does that translate over to now running a bike shop, pizza, champagne, organic biodynamic wines? Is it kind of a short jump, or what kind of learning curve do you have to go through to have that same startup experience with these seemingly disparate areas?
It comes down to exactly the same thing as great people. I mean, which is so cliche, right? Great people that one can trust and trust each other, right? I think that's the piece that is absolutely critical. So to answer your question, beginning of this, did I know anything about food other than I liked to eat it? No. But, it's like through some serendipitous events, you meet someone that does know food, or maybe they're still learning about food, but they have a better understanding of it. And then you have someone that knows about bikes, and then you got someone that knows about wine. And then it becomes very similar, which is, all right, how do we create a stage that allows them to be successful? Like, how do we create that platform for them to be successful? And then I think it's similar, but it's still the whole idea of you have to be paying attention throughout the whole process to like, what is it that we can tighten? What is it that we can make better? What is it that we don't understand? I would suggest that the cafe business is more complex than running a coffee bar. There's more parts to it you can not get right. I can say that after 4 years, I'm finally like pleased with our menu and understand what we want to have on it and understand how the food needs to get done and all of that. But then you still are like, oh, geez, we need to bring down this cost or that cost. We need to manage the business, because if you don't manage the business well, how clever you are doesn't really matter, right? So because then it doesn't last. The good news about building a business like this, it's not like we're constructing a skyscraper, where we need engineering. It's not going to collapse on us, but it could in a different way. We're 4 years old. You could contend that the jury is still out on as to whether or not it's ultimately going to be successful, right? There's still things we're learning. There's still things we're improving. There's still things we're not getting right. There's still things we need to make much better than they are. The question of complexity is a hard one, because I think the right good people can always figure it out. And that's the piece, again, that so much surrounds this developing a culture that cares about the right things. So you can find someone that loves wine, right? That knows it backwards and forwards and could be, be sommelier certified, whatever it is, all those things. But then they could completely not understand how they need to buy the wine, and you have too much inventory or too little inventory, all of those things, right? So it's trying to match all of those skill sets together so that you can not only have, coffee, wine, food, and bicycles that are profoundly impressive when you walk in and see it, but that everything behind it is also tight and together, right? So it's the pursuit of all of those, sadly, relentlessly, that's what has to happen every day, and with a sense of urgency, which I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing me or others say that, but you need to attend to it now. And I think that's the other piece that can be lost. So does it translate from coffee bar to cafe? Not exactly. Can you get people to help you make that transition? You can. And I would say running a fine dining restaurant, the complexity there is, it's infinite. So we're not that. We don't want to be that. We want to be a place where you can get surprisingly good food in an environment where you may not have expected it. We know what we are, and we wish to be the best version of that. That transition is possible and knowable, but it comes at a meaningful cost in time and learning.
When you talk about the good people and relying on them, it all feels like, yes, you're managing expectations around particular offerings, what a food item or a drink specifically. You're managing and leading people more than the thing itself, in departments whose individual focus has to be curated according to the larger experience that people have. So when you talk about having 4 years to kind of refine things, and now the menu is where you want it to be, and that kind of stuff, I'm interested in what kind of pivots you've needed to make according to the larger experience, in terms of, well, this area needs to have a little bit more attention, or it's a little bit more hungry for attention. Than the bike stuff doesn't go bad, is inventory maybe compared to food stuff. So maybe it requires a different focus. What were the main points of refinement for you over 4 years?
I'd say, we moved into the food piece, and some examples of that would be we used to have try and make brunch different. And then we decided that's actually tough on the kitchen based on the kind of place we wish to be. So let's just do the same breakfast items every day.
Okay.
And then it became really good, because it's like anything else. They got to practice. They made the stuff, and it actually was really good for the business. And then we also said, over the course of the 4 years, let's tighten the menu to fewer items well executed. So it's not this voluminous, deli menu with 150 choices, although people always make modifications. But the idea was really to have somewhere around a dozen or less items for breakfast and a dozen or so items for lunch, dinner, and that's it. But just really good versions of those with some seasonal changes, and that's it. So to keep it tight and knowable and practicable, because we're not a fine dining place. We don't aspire to be that. It's that piece of keeping it simpler, frankly. And we in coffee would all agree we'd rather have a place with a coffee menu of 5 drinks that they nail than something voluminous that they get right a third of the time. And I don't think it's any different than that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so you're making it easier on the people so that you can deliver more consistently the thing that you love the most to people who will eventually know you based on what you serve. So there's always going to be people who, whether they are wine snobs, pizza snobs, breakfast snobs, I don't know if that's a thing, but bikes and stuff. And then trying to please all of the most picky of all of those categories doesn't seem like the best play, or is it?
But I would suggest it's like we finally like nailed the burger. I mean, there's so much that goes into a good burger. I mean, and you wonder like, why is it so hard to find a great burger? It's because there's a lot more to it than you think, right? Is it the bun? Is it the size of the bun to the patty? Where do you put all of the ingredients? Does it go above or below the patty? All of those things profoundly impact your experience. It's sort of, it's not dissimilar. Like, is the cappuccino in the right cup? Is the spoon on the saucer? All of those things go into each food item if you're thinking about it correctly. So it's not ever slopped together, that each thing is considered in each of those. So there may be some people that complain that 10 things or 12 things isn't enough. But if you execute those things really well, most people will be thrilled because they're going to find something. And then it is putting together the right 10 or 12 things, right? So that it is broad enough that people are like, oh, cool, like that or that. I think if there is anything I've learned, it's like keeping things tight so that the stuff you are focusing on, it's possible to do it well instead of making it fast. And I think that's a lesson I learned slowly because I get excited about things and I can chase after shiny objects as a person. So now I'm convinced that that's the way to go, which is keep the menu, and even if I look at coffee now too, I think if I were to start a coffee company now from scratch, I would focus on a tight menu of seasonal coffees, right? Which we're like, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense to us now. Like that would be great because I know that these coffees are best this time of year. These coffees are best this time of year. I don't need to futz around with a zillion blends and things like that. I can just have something that's singular and wonderful and well executed. For food, it's really not that dissimilar in the United States. I feel good about our menu that it would work most anywhere on earth. It's that being able to do the things you're doing, usually smaller number of things that you're doing very, very well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you are at the same time putting this concept out there when a lot of coffee shops are also thinking we need to amp up our offerings in our coffee shop to take on food, to take on more offerings because we know the economic viability of our business. It needs to be more robust and retrofitting that might be more difficult than actually starting with the concept. I mean, because the structure itself, you built the structure around the concept of housing these things under the same roof. And people who sign on for it will sign on for the complexity of that experience subconsciously. Even when the stress is on, it's like, well, I did this to myself, I guess. I'm here.
Well, and I think that there's some of the economics, in terms of like, the average sale goes up meaningfully. So the number of transactions that are needed changes, all of that stuff changes. The tips, if you're selling bottles of wine, are different than if you're selling a $6 cup of coffee.
The idea of today's industry strikes me as quite different than what it used to be. Almost a full circle thing, because I think cafes historically had, a variety of offerings, but then when specialty kind of really sunk its claws into the psyche of the professionals, right, it became that very niched down thing where we didn't want to have combination concepts. Not to say that specialization is bad, but exclusion for the fear of watering down at a certain point becomes unwise. But today it feels like we have more freedom to express ourselves in food and offerings. In your experience then today, how do you recommend a coffee entrepreneur entering into the business to conceive of their concept? Is it still open for just the very narrow and niched down concepts, or do we have to be a little bit more multifaceted than that today?
I think it would be very hard to open a successful coffee bar in a big city. I mean, the economics of each place are different. Rent, the cost of the folks working there, how much their rent is. So, or you could operate out a tiny space, and some of it is like, what do you hope to accomplish? So I think you could do a small coffee bar out of a window somewhere, and it could probably work for the proprietor and her friend. But I think that if you actually want to have a full coffee bar experience, let me put it this way. I wouldn't open a place that just sells coffee and pastries in the places I'd want to open because I just think it's so hard. And then I think that also like turning on a roaster and roasting coffee now, also very hard. Entering into the business now, I feel like you need to be able to do something that is deeper and wider than that. For me, I think that the amount of brain damage that goes into having that 300 square foot coffee bar, the restaurant, or whatever you want to call it, the cafe, is not so much more that it's not worth it. And the reward, if it works, is much higher.
And especially if you are going back to what you mentioned, where you have to have that urgency and take care of it now, that you're embracing the cost of what it means to manage that. But it seems like there is a little bit of a leap of faith that says eventually I'm going to adjust, I'm going to acclimate, I'm going to become more resilient to the pressure that I've taken on.
Right. But you have to be the person that's okay with that idea. Look, there are people that started in coffee at the same time that I did, and they still have one cafe. So it depends on what your tolerance is, and again, not good or bad, works for them. They're happy about it. And that's that. So the answer is it depends on what sort of economic viability are you trying to build? It's different. If you want to have a 300 square foot coffee bar and, whatever, and it's cool and it's in fill in the blank and you knock it out. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just a question of what you aspire to do. And I think in today's environment, I think it's a lot harder to open up just a coffee bar that does coffee and pastries. I just think that the economics have become a lot less viable than they once were. That doesn't mean people aren't still doing it. It's just I wouldn't.
Right. And if we knew that we could succeed a little bit, had more confidence in a multifaceted concept, maybe we would allow ourselves the dream to do so. So when it comes to your next phase of the Meteor, now you're 4 years and you've got the Bentonville store, you've got the Austin store. And I did go to the Bentonville shop and had a great time, and it was a great atmosphere and everyone was lovely. So it makes me want to ask, like, what's the next step logically for further development of this? We're still under that 5-year mark of startup, right?
We have plans to do a meaningful amount more of these on the horizon. So, we just opened up a pop-up that's going to become permanent in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
Fayetteville, we're doing a Meteor in Fayetteville, 30 miles from Bentonville. And then we've got Philadelphia, Tucson, Washington, D.C., Miami, Hoboken, which I know sounds interesting. And then we're working on the possibility of Nashville. If I do my Dakota ring for how long construction is and all that stuff, would happen by like 2026.
That's really fast.
We would have 9 or 10. I mean, some of it is we're working with some developers. There's some other opportunities that came our way. The plan is to try and spread out and have more and make this into something that is a national presence.
It's really going to test that culture piece, of course.
It will, for sure. I think we're tightening up all of that stuff now. And I think that, I guess I'm hopeful that in your visit to Bentonville, you got some of the vibe and the culture of what we wanted it to be. So, people were maybe skeptical that we could execute well on coffee, food, bikes, wine. And I think that, again, it comes down to the people and the desire and the culture, and then the just relentless pursuit and staying on it to make sure that happens. And it's certainly not a smooth road. There's a lot you have to digest. And, it's never easy. That doesn't mean it's not fun. But I think that those are the pieces that we're focusing on keeping tight. And then I think you build this core group of people that get it and they can spread out and they can help build it in the other places. The community that we appeal to first, which is like the cyclists, has really embraced it. And we're incredibly grateful that that's the case. So we opened some, and it's just like I said, recently in Dallas, and they're like, oh, they really dig it. So because of its singularity of being, meaning there really isn't anything like it currently that I know. I mean, not in this iteration. I mean, there are coffee and bike shops, but I think that there's not currently much in the space that we're in. So I think that it's nice when it's embraced. I think that Intelligentsia had its moment, then it moved on to some other roaster or whatever, and that's fine, and that's what happens. We're still enjoying the fact that people are digging what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a fun concept. That's the word that I kind of walk away from it with. And it's fun. It's good in a deep sense. And the culture I felt it was pretty infectious. And it's no wonder people are embracing it, because these are all actually just human needs. And we're using food and drink to create that reality for people, right?
Yeah. And I think what to me is really rewarding about it is it's not dissimilar to what I felt was so lovely about coffee, and that, coffee is this like wonderful connective glue where people meet over a cup, or you convene with yourself for 15 seconds and it's like a great part of your day, or whichever part of the day that might be. And I actually think that wine in this iteration with these low intervention wines and just the way people think about it, it's not about drunkenness, it's about connecting. And the same thing with the nice kind of, ingredient driven, locally sourced, all of those food is also of that ilk. And then bicycles, people that enjoy bicycles and active lifestyle connect that way too. So the building of community here is real, and it feels really good. Recently I sent a photo from our cafe in Austin to my business partners. It was like mom holding baby, and it might have been like great grandma, and mom had like a glass of wine and a Rice Krispie treat, right? And then grandma was like eating a burger or something, and, baby in arm. And I'm like, this is so, I mean, that to me is like so wonderfully satisfying that we could offer that place. That's pretty cool. And then cyclists sitting next to them, whatever. That's gratifying.
Doug, obviously, time doesn't do justice to the kind of things we could talk about here on the show, but I'm so excited to have, been able to explore these ideas in your history and what you're working on currently on the show. So thank you so much for sharing with me and the Keys to the Shop audience. Where can we go to learn more and stay in touch with what's going on with the Meteor?
TheMeteor.cafe online for our website. And then, Instagram, it's just at the Meteor Cafe.
At the Meteor Cafe. I encourage anyone who you have the opportunity, go there, come hungry, and leave pretty happy. So, Doug, again, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, I hope that this whole conversation from part 1 to part 2 has been illuminating for you. From the very beginning, I think one of the greatest leadership qualities that we see across the years of Intelligentsia and now the Meteor is tapping into a group of people who have similar values, but also can help push each other to higher degrees of excellence across different disciplines to take on something new, but with such an enthusiasm that you can overcome the challenges of doing something new and create something excellent and entertaining and enjoyable. The atmosphere and the vibe in a place like Intelligentsia or at the Meteor is indicative of a group of people who are proud of what they've created and are excited to continue to create together. And so I'm hoping for continued success for Doug, Chris, and the team there at the Meteor. So a huge thank you to Doug Zell for joining me on the show today. I so appreciate all of our interactions over the years and just how influential you've been in the industry and in my own career. Thank you, sir, so much. And if you are interested in learning more about the Meteor, you can go to themeteor.cafe and also visit them on Instagram. You can find them at the Meteor Cafe. If you are near one of their shops in Dallas, Northwest Arkansas, or Austin, Texas, be sure to stop by and get ready to enjoy yourself. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, if you want to see more 2-part Founder Fridays, or you have questions, comments, or ideas for Keys to the Shop, if you're interested in one-on-one coaching and consultation with me to help you build a wonderful and thriving, profitable, joy-filled coffee bar, all those things is what I'm passionate about helping my clients achieve, you can do so by emailing chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. And don't forget about the key holder coaching groups launching in March, the second round. The first group is almost halfway done. In fact, on the time of the recording of this, the 6th call out of the 12 calls that we have, our 2-hour-long meeting where we focus in on each other's worlds and help each other succeed in specialty coffee. Owners and operators with experience in the industry, this is a group for you to find clarity, support, accountability, encouragement, and more. I would love for you to send me an email if you are interested. I'll get your name on a list of people I can send this application to before the applications open in March. And we can even have a conversation before then as well. So chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do that. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you so much. And with that, that is the end of our episode, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me on this 2-part Switching Gears Founder Friday with Doug Zell. I hope that it was a really inspiring and helpful interview. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.